it took like leaving art school and actually living like outside of that space and having just a humbling time of not making art. Honestly, I mean, it was really quite depressive. Actually, it was a really bad space. I was kind of like post grad because I was having the identity crisis of like, yeah, like actually I don't think I went and knew what I wanted to do at all. What was the point of all that?
4 years.
Yeah, like, let's go. Debt.
Yeah. Welcome to the Narrative Disruption Podcast. Sydney, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome for being had and for, you know what? Let's reverse that. Not you're welcome for being had, but thank you for coming. You said thank you for having me. And I'm thanking you for being a part of this project, both the book and the podcast. And tell folks where you are coming from, where you reside on this big, beautiful planet, and how your life is going.
I'm currently living in Baltimore, Maryland, but I'm originally from here, of Northern Virginia. Been in Baltimore for almost 10 years as well. Love it. Yeah.
You love Baltimore?
I do love Baltimore.
All right. So we're both from here, right?
Yes.
And for those of you who don't know, who want to know the backstory, I actually met Sydney when they were in high school, and I was the coach of the spoken word club.
Yeah.
Co-ran by Brian Hannon. Shout out Brian Hannon, Poetry Now. And we are suburban kids.
Yeah.
And Baltimore is not a suburban place. What is it that drew you to Baltimore? I know you can talk about going to school there, but like,
sure.
Why are you still there? What does the love consist of?
Right. I went to college in Baltimore, and it was partly a choice because it was close by. Because, I mean, I do love Nova. I think there was not this need to like get away, and I did want to be close to my parents. And I was like, I would love a place to just run away from if I need to. But spending time in Baltimore, I just love city living. And I think there is such a very palatable kind of culture and community that any city in America has, especially such an old city like Baltimore. And I think it's developed me into the person that I think that, why we're having these kinds of conversations today is like, it's helped me facilitate those. It's made me a more radical person. It's made me mature. It's a city that is neglected in a lot of ways, but the people there are some of the most like authentic and like very like real people. And because it's so small, you get to know those people in a very personal way that I think maybe some may not be able to in bigger cities. So I think I have a lot of gratitude towards Baltimore for being the city that it is, despite its flaws, despite its neglect from people that should be taking care of it. But the people there are the ones that are like making it grow. So love it, Baltimore.
Northern Virginia, born and bred, out in Baltimore, and you went to MICA.
Yeah.
What do you do now with your art? What did you go to MICA for? And how, now that you're a graduate of MICA, what do you do with your art?
So I went to MICA with an understanding I wanted to do illustration. I knew in high school I wanted to do illustration. It was very like cut and dry. Like, let's just do it. And in high school, I was working, and like throughout like being a kid, I wanted to do comics. But when I went to MICA, I had this like uninspired, kind of typical 20-year-old like identity crisis, and was like, oh, I can't do comics. Okay, like that's not practical. And I don't think I was able to connect with the kind of comics that I guess at the time at school felt like people were making. So it immediately felt, I don't know, I think I got in my head way too much about it. So I was like, oh, I can't do comics. Let me just focus on something that's like, like gonna get me a job. Yeah, which was completely ridiculous because I don't know if it's this like cyclical nature, like yourself better than you think you do.
Yeah.
That like I avoided comics so long when that's the only thing I wanted to do. And, we've been working on this comic for so long, and it's almost like I didn't count it enough to be like, you already do comics. Like, just keep doing them. And I was like, yeah, I really do like comics. Like, I should make that the thing that like I like own and like I'm proud of and like do with a lot of authenticity without the imposter syndrome. Like, just make comics. Like, don't worry about anything else. Was the post art school clarity was like that.
So now I want to get into the book first, right? We're going to get to more of your politics and your process and your values and your story. But I want to talk about the story of the book. And I'll start with just a little bit of background and then I'm going to throw it to you. Okay. So I was working at Hayfield with Brian Hannon, and you were an artist there. And whenever we did a chapbook for one of the poetry clubs that we had in the area, we would always go to you to do the cover art. And Brian Hannon had this idea of doing a graphic novel with one of my poems. And we began, I believe, the end of your senior year or between your senior year and going to Micah.
Yeah, I believe
right?
so.
Yeah. And I think we even started with different poems than the ones that actually ended up in the book. And talk to me about what it felt like to be a graduating senior about to go to college to learn how to draw, more proficiently, I guess.
Right.
But to be approached by someone and say, hey, I have this big, expansive idea project. What was that like? Were you nervous? Were you excited? Bring me back to that space.
I think, honestly, when you approached me with it, like you, Brian Hannon, and Brian Gillespie were all like exceedingly like very supportive mentors, I think, that I had in high school, and like people that like very like no fuss, like we're like, I believe in you and I believe in the art you're making, and like made me feel like really seen in a way that like my art teacher at the time didn't. So it felt like almost like kind of natural. I didn't feel nervous about it. It felt like, oh, like that's really nice that they want to trust me with this. Like that felt very especially our partnership, like that you trust me with this, and especially like for how young I was and like where I was starting out, like not a professional by any means. So the fact that you had so much faith in me was like, it was shocking, honestly. Like I was genuinely surprised. But it meant a lot to have people like kind of just believe in you innately and like not really like, but also the fact that it was equal. Like we felt like a true partnership and not this like, I'm going to, tell you what to do. It was collaborative the whole way through. And I think that also, it doesn't feel intimidating when you're collaborating with someone. Like I think, or at least when, your hand in hand is not like someone just dictating the whole project to you and you're like, everything is like contingent on this. Like I need to make this work. And like, especially this has been a long project for us that like all the more you get really like settled and comfortable in it. And yeah, I don't think I ever felt actually intimidated by this too much, just more surprised.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's interesting you say it, because I don't think I ever had a doubt of the fact that there was going to be a joyful process. I had no idea where it was going to go. And to be honest with you, I've had doubts, which is why the project took so long, not in whether or not your art was good or you interpreted my idea well, but whether anybody else would care. Right. And it sat there almost ready to cross the finish line for years at times, as life got hectic and things happen and so on and so forth. But I just want to sort of like talk a little bit about the collaborative part of the process, because I think we felt it out as it went on, because it did seem like my project at the beginning, because it's my story. But that's only because most of my part of it was already done going into it. And I knew that as a partner, I was going to have to assist in telling the story because the story was in my head. But I can't force how my partner sees something, right? And so I think the trust was both there because we've seen your art and we knew you were competent, but also because when you try to make somebody do something exactly how you see it in your head, you are not using you are using them as a machine almost, and not as a collaborative person.
Right.
And you've always had a great I know you said Baltimore helped mature you, but you were always the more mature one of the group. I know back then it's probably harder to see, but as a mentor, as a person coming into the classroom and seeing you with your classmates, I think we always trusted you to turn the things you were going to turn in on time. And we also knew that you weren't super excited about poetry. So like the fact that you like participated in or maybe the speaking of poetry in front of people.
Yeah, I would not have been able to do that.
Yeah.
I have way too strong stage fright. I think that was what was so engaging about it too, was that got to really get to know you because of having friends just who were in the poetry club. That I was like, can I join, but I'm not gonna really write poetry, and I'm not gonna perform it because I will probably faint.
Well, and that's actually just a really great lesson for people doing youth development and programs. Let people be present. If they're not disruptive, and even if they are disruptive at first, they're probably disruptive for a reason, and try to find out what that reason is and find their talent and make it a part of the group process. We could have easily said, actually, if you're not going to write, if you're not going to perform, this is the poetry club. We do spoken word. But I think that was one of the, even though we always got our butts kicked at the slams, one of the special parts of our clubs was we just wanted that fringe group, that those folks who didn't have other clubs to be in, to have somewhere to be. And look what happened, right? That idea of opening up space allowed for this relationship to foster. All right, more questions about the book and the process. So I know that I would call you and be like, hey, here's the idea. And you would get your notebook out and you would just start writing things.
Yeah.
And you would sketch something and then send it back and sketch something in the back. And I'm going back and forth almost like I am, changing my food order. Because it's easy for me to say the words, can you put this thing over here? Right. It's a completely different thing for you to actually sit back down and draw it. So where were your frustrations in the process? I think by the time we got to the last bit, we kind of ironed out the way that works best, that makes it least amount of work for you, and we get the most done in our meetings. But at the beginning, there had to be frustration. So what were the learning pains for someone who may be thinking about doing this with an author? How would you, change that process, and what hurt?
Sure. I have had both experiences of working with you who had a good sense of visual direction and how you saw this book looking. And I've also worked with folks who don't have a lot of visual direction, and it was giving me the words, but I was having to ask, I want you to give me a little more visual. Do you a little more something to go on? So having both, I think, has been really helpful in how to then construct and navigate these kinds of conversations with working with collaboratively with authors or other artists. Of if you're saying I want the page to look this way, it's and I see maybe something is not working, or it's maybe this could be a problem. I don't think there was an issue where I was hey, I could see you running into this of do you think that the flow works this way? Does this read well if we're putting it this way? What's just how is this coming off? I feel that was working pretty well. I don't think I was actually too frustrated in a lot of instances. I think...
You hear that, world? I'm a great collaborator. No frustration working with me. Right, Conrado? Anyway.
I'm trying to think. It's been a while since, been in that headspace of when we're first and initiating brainstorming of thumbnailing and sketching, which is the most tedious part of any comic making progress or process, I should say, for folks. That is the hardest part. Yeah, I don't feel it was that rough. Because I would be... If anything, I would just ask you, hey, say that again. If anything was well, hold on. Yeah. Let's slow down. Let's or can you sketch that for me?
Yeah.
Can you just draw that out and how you see
it?
And,
man, all of my really bad stick drawings of where. I dig it. I think that really, that was a testament to your ability to connect with me as a partner.
Mm.
Like, I know that what I drew should not have been interpreted by any sane or rational mind. But the fact that you could take that along with the words and whatever I had image or I had said out to you and actually create something that we could then talk about. That is how I knew that at no point in time was I with the wrong person on this process. Awesome. It happens. Like just as you said, like I've had those type of collaborations in music. I've had those type of collaborations writing poetry, and even like doing programs. Like there's a trust and a shared unspoken language. And it's what happens after I've given you the gift of whatever I'm offering, right? And the same thing with you. When you send me the drawings, how I interpret it, whatever is happening there is a testimony to, I think, just us being on the same wavelength, right? And then maybe if we tried this again in 20 years, it wouldn't be there, but it was there this time. And I think that's really awesome. More questions about the book. You said earlier today, as we were preparing for this, it's my book. And I got super excited when you said that, because I don't think I've heard you refer to it as my book. And I mean, I'm having this same conversation with the people I'm collaborating in other spaces. It's like, I know I presented the thing, but I didn't give it to you as a lower partner in it, right? Sure. Like I wanted it to be a collaboration. Like the story may be mine, but the interpretation is yours. And when do you think it started to feel less like something I'm being commissioned to do, and actually I'm on this page too somehow?
If I'm being honest, I think there's times throughout the process that I definitely didn't necessarily feel like it was my book. And I think that's just because the work, I made for our book is also like not the work I make on my own. Like they're very different. And if anything, like I think strive to kind of cater to more of an adult audience. But I think I was being like unfair to all the work that we have been putting into this to make it, to not own it. And the fact that, it's been such a long process, I was like, is that fair? Is that fair to Joseph? Is that fair to me? Like the amount of effort and time I put into this, and not want to be like, yeah, that's my book too. And like, it's not innately like the work I'm making in my personal work, because it's not your entire thing. Like you're doing this with a partner and you're bringing their story to life too. So it can't be all wholly yours. Like it really was like relinquishing like what I guess it meant to me to have something be like entirely mine. I think we were bringing that up kind of like off the camera too, of like, what is ownership? Yeah. And like innately, this is not like one or the other. This is a shared thing. So I think it took honestly, just like letting that go, being like, like, why do you not feel attached to this right now? When you've been living in it for a very long time. Yeah. And I think it helps to also have your other projects too, to be like, well, what is yours? And then to be like, then you can celebrate both. Yeah. Of like, this is ours. This is ours. Yeah. This is mine. This is yours. We are artists and we are doing so many things all the time. Yeah. But that's the rewarding part of doing collaborative work, is that like, it gets to not be yours too. And you can like, kind of like, chill out a little bit. I don't know. I think that's how I kind of internalize it, is like, you're leaving, sort of your ego a little bit to the side, because you're allowing this to be a space that you're curating with someone else. So you have to kind of chill out. Yeah, you do. I mean, if you don't, I'm sure there are plenty of stories where people don't, but when you do, beautiful things can happen. Exactly. And I think that's been the rewarding part of the partnership. And even like other folks I've partnered with, is that like, we are doing this collaboratively. It's not like, as you're saying, a dictating of like, do this. So like, I don't really care what your suggestion is. It's very much like, we are working on this together.